Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and today's continuation of the What's Next series covers quite possibly the most disappointing team of the 2018-19 NBA season, the Boston Celtics. Going into this year, I, just like many other people, had high expectations for this Celtics team. They were coming off of a postseason in which they were one game away from reaching the NBA Finals, even without the services of the injured Kyrie Irving and Gordon Hayward. The healthy return of those All-Stars combined with the growth of young players Terry Rozier, Jaylen Brown, and Jayson Tatum, and the veteran leadership of Al Horford was supposed to be enough to catapult them to the top of the LeBronless Eastern Conference. It seemed like this was the year that it was all going to come together. The culmination of all the trades and maneuvering by Danny Ainge since disbanding the Big Three era by trading away Kevin Garnett and Paul Pierce, and it was all going to come together to create a true Eastern Conference power for years to come. But then the season actually started, and it all went just about as bad as it possibly could have. The on-the-court stuff wasn't all that great. They got off to a bad start and sort of recovered from it at various points throughout the season, and at times it even looked like they completely righted the ship and would be back on track for a finals appearance, but inevitably everything would fall apart once again. A very similar story to what happened in their second-round playoff series loss to the Bucks in 5 games. They gave their fans just enough hope to think that maybe they figured it all out, just to go back to their same underachieving selves. But to make it all even worse than that, this season caused a ton of questions to arise that nobody really thought would be an issue. The first is the future of Kyrie Irving as a Celtic and his impending 2019 free agency. Prior to the season, he stated his desire to return to the team, but mid-season he seemed to flip a switch either as a result of him being frustrated with the constant pestering of the media or an actual desire to explore other options, and his desire will be the biggest focal point of this offseason for Boston. The other big question that arose, which was pretty surprising, was the legitimacy of Jayson Tatum as a future All-Star in the NBA. As a rookie, he showed great promise as a complementary player in the regular season, scoring efficiently, spacing the floor, and picking and choosing his spots to be more aggressive and create his own shots when Irving was off the floor, and then took his game to a whole new level in the postseason with Irving out of the lineup completely, and showed glimpses of his future as a potential #1 offensive option on a good team. This year, however, things just weren't quite the same. His per-game numbers increased slightly, but his efficiency dipped as he took more long twos and got to the free throw line less, and overall just had less of an impact on the game. Whether this is just a bit of regression while getting used to having Irving and Hayward in the lineup, or are signs of a player that doesn't have as high of a ceiling as many once thought, remains to be seen. With the season now reviewed, let's take a look at some building blocks for the Celtics. The first is obviously Kyrie. We all know how good he is, but all the intrigue for him really comes in the free agency section, so I'll save most of the conversation around him for that later in the video. And honestly, you all kind of know the deal with these guys already. Brown and Tatum are intriguing young players with different skill sets and roles that will be a big part of this team's future, either as parts of their roster or pieces of a big trade, with the added intrigue of them being 2020 and 2021 restricted free agents, respectively. Terry Rozier showed flashes of being a really good starting point guard in last year's playoffs, but is a restricted free agent this summer and looks to be on his way out if his recent comments are any indication. Marcus Smart is just 25 and is signed long-term and is a huge part of this team and its identity despite his near constant injury struggles, but if this team does decide to make a big trade in the near future, his salary is almost guaranteed to be used to make the money work. And then last up are Gordon Hayward, who went back and forth from looking awful to respectable in his first season back from a horrific injury, and Al Horford, who is a great leader and all-around player, but also interestingly holds a player option for this summer of around $30 million and is approaching his mid-30s. Okay, with that covered, let's move on to the draft. Boston has 3 picks within the first 22 selections in this year's draft. Their own at 22, the Clippers at 20, and the Kings at 14. This is not an uncommon position for them to be in, as they've had multiple draft picks in seemingly every draft in the last couple of years, but I'd be pretty surprised if they stayed where they are with all 3 of these picks and used them to actually select a player. I would expect them to either use them to move up into the top 10, or of course they could use them in a trade scenario, so really I would view these more as assets to be used in a trade or trades rather than individual picks, because again, I'd be surprised to see them use all three in the positions that they currently are. And with that said, let's just go ahead and get right into the heart of everything for the Celtics. The possibilities for making an Anthony Davis trade, Kyrie Irving's free agency, as well as the Celtics free agency situation as a whole. First up, a potential AD trade. Things changed pretty dramatically for both the Knicks and the Lakers in this category as of the draft lottery a few nights ago, but the Celtics are pretty much in the same spot as before. They have 3 draft picks this year, the right to the Grizzlies pick next year, top 6 protected, or the following year unprotected, and plenty of young players to use as assets such as Tatum, Smart, and Brown if they wanted to. On paper, if the Celtics wanted to give up everything they have for Anthony Davis, they absolutely have the best package to send to New Orleans. The only part of their deal that is lacking compared to LA and New York is not having a top 4 pick in this year's draft, but they can try and package their 3 firsts this year to move up and make their offer more enticing to the Pelicans, while also having that future Grizzlies pick to use as well if they want to. But again, that's only if they want to try and throw everything they have at New Orleans to land AD, which I'm not certain they will do, or at least not right away. The timing of all this is important because they can't actually make an AD trade until free agency when Kyrie opts out because of a rule that prevents players of their contracts being on the same team at the same time, which is why they couldn't trade for Davis mid-season. But that doesn't really put them behind either LA or New York anyway, because they would both like to wait until after free agency to make a deal so that they can use up their significant cap space on other free agents first, rather than taking on Davis's salary, and the Pelicans don't look to be in a hurry to move Davis at the moment anyway. But with Boston's situation specifically, they will probably be afraid of giving up too much for Davis, because this could all go very sideways pretty quickly. The worst case scenario here would be Kyrie opting out, the Celtics making a deal for AD that includes the picks and Tatum or Brown, then Davis leaving as a free agent in 2020, and Kyrie Irving not returning this year either, and the last few years of building assets and making trades essentially resulting in nothing, as Irving and Davis are both playing elsewhere. Now that isn't all that likely a scenario, because Danny Ainge is going to be doing plenty of research and recon before making a Davis trade to make sure that he intends on staying in town in 2020 before giving up a ton of assets. And if Irving leaves first, then they might not even consider an AD trade after that anyway, and could just choose to focus on developing the young guys. The best case scenario is that Kyrie opts out, re-signs in Boston, they trade for AD, both of those guys stay healthy in Boston, and they create a true super team. But realistically, what actually happens will probably fall somewhere in the middle, and the first domino of all this is going to be what Kyrie Irving decides to do in free agency. He's going to opt out, we all know that, but it doesn't really seem all that likely that he returns to Boston, at least not right now. There seems to be some legit bad blood between him and some of the young guys, and really nobody on the team seemed happy from about February on through the end of the season, and even Celtics fans are questioning if they even want Kyrie to come back. Now, to be fair, once they've had some time to cool down after what was such a disappointing season, if Kyrie came out and said that he wants to come back and re-sign, I'm sure most Celtics fans would welcome him back, as would the organization, but that particular situation isn't all that likely either. He seems legitimately intrigued by the possibility of playing with Kevin Durant in New York or Brooklyn, and with the apparent animosity that came out of this season, maybe he'll actually follow through on that. The other big variable here that isn't being talked about as much as you look at the Celtics free agency as a whole is the fact that Al Horford has a player option this offseason as well. It has kind of been assumed, given his age and how big a part of the Celtics he has become, that he would opt into his $30 million option and become a 2020 free agent, but maybe even he could be so fed up with how the season went that he could explore other options. He is still a really valuable player, and even though he wouldn't get $30 million a year on a new deal, he could probably sign a 3 to 4 year contract with good value annually that provides him good long-term security on what would be his last big contract in the NBA. Again, this wasn't really much of a consideration before this season, but it's entirely possible that the Celtics' 2 best players both opt out this offseason and create complete chaos around their future as a team without even considering the possibilities of an Anthony Davis trade. In the end, things are totally up in the air for the Celtics this offseason, but at least they do have options. Even in a scenario in which Rozier, Irving, and Horford all leave this offseason and they don't make a move for Anthony Davis, they're still in a relatively good position with Marcus Smart, Jayson Tatum, and Jaylen Brown, and a ton of draft capital both this year and next. They won't be contending for championships right away with that group the way that they would if they end up with both Kyrie and AD on the team next year, but they'd be far from without hope, and that's the luxury that Danny Ainge has created for this team over the past few years. For basically any other franchise around the league, with the exception of the Warriors, the possibility of losing a player of Irving's caliber would be a doomsday scenario for the future of their team. But for the Celtics, it's just another direction things could possibly go that they can still recover from relatively easily. As of right now, there is no way for me to predict how things will go for Boston this offseason, but what I do know is that I'm extremely excited to see how it all turns out. And that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.